She wasn't rescued. She was purchased, then set free by a man who refused to own her. But freedom in the frontier always comes with a price. $4 decided her fate. Sold to settle a debt she never made, she stood in a dust-choked corral, waiting for her life to end or begin. Before we step into this story of the Wild West, remember to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because what starts here as a forced sale will turn into something no one in Lone Mesa saw coming. The outskirts of Lone Mesa looked especially unforgiving under the afternoon sun. Dust clung to every face and every horse, coating jackets, boots, and the splintered rails of the auction corral. The air carried the familiar mix of sweat, dry earth, and stale tobacco, a scent so common to livestock trading it usually went unnoticed. But today felt different. The tension didn't belong to cattle or horses. It belonged to the woman standing alone in the center of the pen. Conversations dropped into uneasy murmurs every time Mara Elson shifted her weight, as though the men watching were quietly calculating her value. Her wrists were tied loosely in front of her, the rope not tight enough to hurt, but heavy enough to remind her she had no control. She fought to keep her face steady, unwilling to show how badly her hands shook. At 25, she looked older than she was, worn thin by months of cleaning up after her stepbrother's mistakes. Her body carried the exhaustion of someone, pushed into decisions she never agreed to make. Owen, her stepbrother, leaned against the fence with the lazy posture of a man already finished with her. He had gambled away more money than he could repay, and instead of working it off, he dragged her here, justifying it with the same lie he always used, that she had no one else who cared. He didn't even look troubled as men studied her from a distance, talking about her as if she were a piece of equipment. Mara saw him laugh with one of the bidders, and something inside her went tight. It wasn't rage. It was the dull realization that she had reached the end of what she could endure from him. She lowered her eyes, tracing the dirt beneath her boots, so the crowd wouldn't see fear tighten her jaw. Her thoughts drifted to the last year, leaving her mother's home after the funeral, drifting between short-term jobs, trying and failing to keep Owen from sinking deeper into gambling. Every choice she'd made had led here, and she had no idea how to stop herself from disappearing into whatever life the highest bidder wanted. The creak of the corral gate broke her focus. The crowd shifted as a tall man stepped into view. He didn't look like the others. He wasn't loud or rushed, and he didn't carry the sharp hunger of someone eager to bargain. He moved with the careful pace of a man who considered each step before taking it. His long coat lifted in the wind, showing work-worn jeans and boots thick with trail dust. The brim of his hat shaded most of his face, but when he stopped at the fence, his eyes lifted just enough to meet hers. She didn't know his name yet, but his presence felt solid, quiet and strangely grounded. Mara noticed how he stood, spine straight, shoulders loose, hands steady. He wasn't threatening, but he wasn't uncertain either. He looked like someone used to long days of hard labor and long nights of silence. His expression held no amusement or interest, only controlled observation that made her breath catch. Frank had come to Lone Mesa for practical reasons only. He needed supplies, tools, salt for his ranch. He avoided town unless there was a clear purpose and never lingered where conversation came too easily. He lived alone, on a wide stretch of land, miles from his nearest neighbor, carrying memories that taught him to avoid trouble whenever possible. His life was simple by design: keep the ranch running, stay clear of violence, and keep distance from anything that might drag old wounds to the surface. He hadn't planned to involve himself in anything beyond his errands. But the moment he saw a woman presented like freight, something shifted. He had seen mistreatment before on cattle trails and in mining camps. He knew exactly where scenes like this ended. He told himself it wasn't his concern. Yet when Mara lifted her chin, fighting to hide her fear, he made a decision without saying a word. Owen raised his voice. $4 clears the debt. Anyone got better? A few men hesitated, weighing whether she was worth the trouble. Before anyone answered, Frank reached into his coat, pulled out 4 folded bills, and handed them to Owen. He didn't negotiate. Owen took the money quickly, surprise flashing across his face at how easily the trade was done. Frank stepped through the gate, his boots landing on packed dirt with slow, even weight. He drew a small knife, sliced the rope binding her wrists, and tucked the blade away. The rope fell, and Mara's breath hitched, but Frank didn't touch her. He stepped back, giving her space. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice low and calm. Mara waited for conditions, for demands, but none came. His tone carried no pressure. She searched his face for clues, for hidden intention, but his eyes stayed steady and unreadable. Owen waved them off, already counting his money. "Take her." "That's paid." Frank ignored him. Mara moved toward the gate slowly. She had no reason to trust a stranger, but staying meant waiting for another bidder. She studied Frank again, looking for aggression and finding none. What unsettled her was his restraint, deliberate and controlled. Frank led her to his horse, a calm brown mare with a worn saddle. He checked the cinch, then stepped aside so she could mount first. He waited without impatience. She climbed up, hands trembling. Frank mounted behind her, keeping enough distance that their bodies barely touched. His silence wasn't cold, just careful, like a man who spoke only when necessary. The mare stepped forward, carrying them away from Lone Mesa. Mara watched the town shrink behind them, buildings blurring into dusty shapes. She expected questions or commands, but Frank kept his gaze ahead, guiding the horse with practiced ease. After several minutes he spoke. "You'll get water when we stop." The simple statement startled her. No claim, no threat, just practical concern. "I can wait," she said softly. "If you need something, say it." His voice was firm without being harsh, the voice of someone used to handling emergencies calmly. They rode across open plains, stretching toward a distant ridge. As the sun dipped, the air cooled. Mara gripped the saddle horn, not from fear of falling, but because the quiet felt unfamiliar. She wasn't used to men who didn't try to control her. Frank lifted his chin toward the horizon. "Ranches past that ridge." She nodded, unsure whether she felt relief or unease. She didn't know him or his intentions, but she knew this silence wasn't the kind that waited to strike. It was the silence of a man who lived far from others and preferred it that way. As they rode on, her shoulders loosened from exhaustion. She didn't trust him yet, but she didn't fear him the way she feared the men back in town. For the first time in a long while, she felt the possibility, not the certainty, that her life might not collapse tonight. The trail stretched north in a thin line through tall grass and scattered sage. Shadows lengthened as the sun dropped lower. Mara stayed tense, each step of the mare sending a steady rhythm through her body. Frank guided the horse with small, controlled movements, careful not to crowd her even when the trail narrowed. She noticed every detail, how he adjusted his posture instead of pulling her closer, how his hands remained steady. Years of anticipating danger had taught her to read men, and his restraint unsettled her because she didn't know where to place it. They passed a line of cottonwoods, leaves whispering in the wind. Mara glanced toward the sound, half expecting riders. Nothing appeared. Worry lingered anyway. Owen had sold her easily. If regret set in, he might come looking. Frank finally spoke when they reached flatter ground. "Water break." She dismounted stiffly, nearly losing balance. Frank reached out instinctively, stopping short of touching her when she steadied herself. He filled a tin cup from a narrow creek and handed it to her. She hesitated, studying his face for impatience and finding none. She drank slowly, the cold easing the dryness in her throat. When she returned the cup, he rinsed it and scanned the horizon. "You hurt anywhere?" The question surprised her. "My legs are stiff," she said. "We'll stop again before dark." He checked the mare's hooves with practiced care. Mara watched, noting the same patience he showed the animal. No harshness, no wasted movement. When he finished, he gestured toward the saddle. "You ride in front again." She stepped smoother that way. She mounted, and they resumed. After a while, she gathered the courage to ask, "You didn't know me. Why step in?" Frank kept his eyes on the trail. Didn't want to see what happened if no one did. The simplicity of his answer struck her, harder than any explanation. He wasn't looking for gratitude. The land rose toward the ridge, the sky deepening to blue. She breathed in sage and dust, grounding herself. She reminded herself to stay alert. Kindness didn't always mean safety. Frank adjusted the reins. Cabins past the ridge. We'll reach it before full dark. She followed his gaze to the higher ground ahead. The threat of Lone Mesa felt far behind, but uncertainty remained. No one else lives near us, he added. You'll have space. She needed time to understand what space meant when she'd lived without any. They crested the ridge together, fading light stretching shadows across the land below, and what waited there would change her life, though she didn't know it yet. The slope fell into a quiet stretch of grassland, untouched by the chaos she'd left. Cottonwoods lined a creek, and a small cabin sat against a low rise, smoke drifting from its chimney. Frank guided the mare down carefully. The cabin came into focus, thick timber walls, a pitched roof, a porch with a single chair. A corral stood nearby, a brown mare lifting its head calmly. Mara's pulse quickened. The place looked lived in but not neglected. A cabin could still be a cage, she reminded herself. Frank stopped near the porch. You can get down. He steadied the mare as she dismounted, legs shaking. He nodded toward the door. Go ahead. Door isn't stuck. She hesitated, then pushed it open. Inside, she found order instead of threat. A table, 2 chairs, a bed with folded blankets, tools hung neatly, faint embers in the hearth. The room smelled of pine and smoke. For the first time that day, her shoulders loosened. Frank entered carrying firewood, leaving the door open. He built the fire with quiet efficiency. You can take the bed, he said. I'll use the chair. She blinked. You don't have to. I know. He hung his hat, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. Strong features softened by firelight, lines of long work etched around his eyes. No impatience there, only focus. He set out tin plates. I'll fix something to eat. Sit if you want. The permission unsettled her. She sat, heart racing. He cooked a simple stew, the smell filling the cabin. He adjusted shutters to block the wind, not to trap her. When he placed a bowl in front of her, she lifted the spoon, the heat soothing her throat. Why live out here alone? She asked. Grew up moving job to job. Like this land best, he said. And why bring me here? He met her eyes. Didn't want to leave you there. That was all. He finished eating, stood and said, You don't owe me anything. We'll figure out tomorrow when the day starts. He turned down the fire and took the chair. Mara lay on the bed, waiting for fear to return. It didn't. The cabin stayed quiet, holding only warmth, firelight, and the steady breathing of a man who had saved her without asking anything in return. It wasn't safety yet, but it wasn't a trap. It was something new. Era woke before sunrise, disoriented for a brief moment by the unfamiliar quiet. No shouting, no sudden footsteps, no slammed doors. Just the soft crackle of dying embers in the hearth and the steady, even breathing of Frank asleep in the chair across the room. He hadn't moved closer during the night. He hadn't hovered or watched her. His presence stayed exactly where he had placed it, solid but contained. That alone eased something tight in her chest. She slipped from the bed slowly, careful not to wake him, and crossed the room to the wash basin. Cold water splashed her face, sharp enough to chase away lingering fear. In the small, dented mirror above the basin, she barely recognized herself. She looked tired, yes, but not hunted. The realization made her throat tighten. Frank stirred as she set the cloth down. He blinked once, orienting himself, then sat up straighter. Morning, he said, his voice low and steady, like someone accustomed to early starts. Morning, she replied, unsure how to behave around a man who didn't demand anything from her. He rose, stretched carefully, then moved to the stove, adding wood and coaxing the fire back to life. He didn't glance at her to see if she was helping. He didn't expect it. That too felt strange. I could take over, she offered. He looked at her briefly. If you're comfortable. Not obligation. Choice. She nodded and took the spoon, adding dried beans and ground meal to the pot. Frank pulled on his coat and checked the window latch, every movement deliberate. When the food was ready, she served the bowls. He accepted his with a short nod. They ate in quiet, the silence natural rather than heavy. Afterward, he grabbed a bucket and gestured toward the door. Need to check the mare. You can join if you want. Outside, the morning air bit gently at her skin. The corral rails were straight and well kept. The mare greeted them calmly. Frank handed Mara a brush. Slow strokes along the neck. She followed his instruction. the mare leaning into the touch. Her breathing steadied. Frank checked the trough, fixed a loose rail, spread fresh hay. He worked efficiently without commentary. When she finished brushing, he glanced over. "You did good." The simple acknowledgement hit harder than praise ever had. They moved through small chores, splitting logs, sweeping the porch, organizing tools. The work fell into a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. By midday, Frank leaned against the porch railing. "You don't have to do all this," he said. "If you need rest, take it." She looked out over the land. "It's better to stay busy. Keeps my mind quiet." He nodded once. "Same." The afternoon passed quietly. As evening approached, she cooked again, adding dried pepper. Frank tasted it and nodded approval. Warmth spread through her chest. When night fell, he prepared the chair again. She watched him and realized he wasn't performing kindness. He was simply living the way he always had. That night, fear didn't return. It was replaced by something close to calm. The next morning, pale light slipped across the floor as Frank sharpened a knife at the table. The sound was steady, controlled. "You slept," he observed. "A little." He set the knife aside and handed her a cup of warm water. "Drink before we leave." Fence line's a long walk. Outside, the air was crisp. They set off north, the grass brushing their boots. Silence followed them, practical and unforced. After a while, Mara spoke. "You haven't asked about my past." Frank slowed slightly. "It's yours to say." They reached the fence. He adjusted a leaning post while she held the rail. When he finished, she spoke. "He sold me because he lost money. Not because of anything I did." Frank's jaw tightened. "But he didn't interrupt. I thought he'd stop," she continued. "He never meant to. People like that don't care who they hurt," Frank said quietly. They moved along the fence. The path narrowed, forcing them closer. She didn't feel trapped. "You paid the money," she said. "Most men would say I owe them." Frank met her eyes. "I didn't buy you. I stopped something." They reached the last post. The land opened wide before them. Frank said, "If you ever want to leave, you can." She swallowed. "Why say that?" "Because your life isn't mine to control." They walked back in silence. That afternoon, while brushing the mare, Mara noticed dust rising in the distance. A rider, her hand froze. Frank followed her gaze. "You know him?" "Owen," she said. Frank folded his rag and walked toward the porch, calm sharpening around him. Owen arrived angry and unsteady. "You think you can just take her?" Frank stood firm. "You took the money. She's my blood." Mara stepped behind. "Frank, she's not property," Frank said. Owen threatened force. Frank shifted his stance, resolve clear. "Get back on your horse." Owen hesitated, then retreated. When he was gone, the land settled again. "You all right?" Frank asked. She nodded. "You don't owe me protection," she said. "I'm not doing it out of debt," he replied. That evening, Mara entered the cabin, knowing a conversation waited. "I want to understand why you helped me," she said. Frank sat across from her. "I've seen harm done when no one stepped in. I won't allow it here. Why does that matter to you?" He answered simply. "Nobody helped my mother." The truth settled between them. He served stew. "What happens now?" she asked. "You stay as long as you want, and if he comes back, I'll handle him. What do you want from me?" "Nothing you don't choose to give." Her breath trembled. "Do you want me to stay?" "Only if you want to." She met his gaze. "I want to see what life looks like without running." He nodded. "Then you'll see it here." That night the cabin felt different. Less like shelter, more like a beginning. The rhythm of the ranch settled into Mara's bones, faster than she expected. Days began before sunrise and ended with sore muscles and quiet satisfaction. Frank never set rules for her presence, never claimed authority over her time. If she joined him, it was because she chose to. If she stepped away, he didn't question it. That freedom was unsettling at first, like walking without a railing after years of clinging to walls. A week passed. Then another. Mara learned the land by walking it. She followed the creek until it narrowed into a ribbon of stones, learned where the grass stayed greener after drought, where the ground dipped just enough to hide a twisted ankle if you weren't careful. Frank showed her how to mend wire, how to read weather in the sky, how to spot a restless animal before it bolted. He taught without hovering, correcting only when needed. When she got something wrong, he didn't sigh or raise his voice. He simply waited, then showed her again. One evening, as the sun bled orange into the horizon, Mara found herself laughing. The sound startled her so much she stopped mid-motion, hands resting on a stack of split wood. Frank looked over from the fence line. "What?" he asked. "I didn't know I still remembered how to do that," she said quietly. He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "Takes time for things to come back." That night, as the fire burned low, she noticed Frank staring into the flames longer than usual. His shoulders were tense, his jaw set. "You're thinking loud," she said. He glanced at her, surprised, then exhaled slowly. "Town talk reaches farther than it should." Her stomach tightened. "About me? About a woman who vanished after a debt was paid?" He met her eyes. "People will start asking questions." Fear flickered, sharp and familiar. "I don't want to bring trouble here." Frank leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "Trouble comes whether invited or not. What matters is how you meet it." The next sign came 3 days later. Mara was hanging laundry when she spotted riders on the far ridge. Not close enough to identify, but close enough to make her chest tighten. She didn't wait. She walked straight to the barn, where Frank was repairing a saddle. "Someone's out there." He stood immediately, calm settling over him like armor. He didn't rush, didn't grab a weapon. He simply stepped outside and studied the horizon. "3 riders," he said after a moment. "Watching. Not approaching." "Is that bad?" "Means they're measuring," he replied. "Seeing what kind of man I am." Mara swallowed. "And what kind are you?" Frank looked at her, expression unreadable. "One who doesn't bluff." That night, he showed her how to load a rifle. Not to scare her, not to impress her, just preparation. "You don't point it unless you mean it," he said. "And you never pull the trigger out of fear." Her hands shook as she held the weight of it. "What if I freeze?" "Then you lower it," he said. Freezing is better than acting without thought. The riders didn't return the next day, or the next, but tension stayed, coiled beneath the calm. Weeks passed, and with them came change neither of them named. Mara's movements grew confident. Her voice steadied. She started humming while she worked. Frank noticed small things. The way she anticipated his next step during chores. The way she left space between them, but no longer flinched when their hands brushed. One afternoon, rain rolled in fast and heavy. They barely made it inside before the sky opened. Thunder cracked overhead, rattling the windows. Mara froze, breath shallow. Frank noticed immediately. "Storms?" She nodded. "My mother hated them. Owen would drink through them." Things broke. He didn't touch her. He just sat across the room and spoke evenly, grounding her with sound. "This cabin's solid. Walls are thick. Roof sound." She listened. Slowly her breathing eased. When the storm passed, something between them had shifted. That night, as they shared a late meal, Mara spoke before she could second-guess herself. "You don't ask me to stay, but you make room for me." Frank set his bowl down. "That's the only way staying means anything." Her voice trembled. "What happens when this stops being simple?" He considered her carefully. "Then we decide what it becomes." The following morning, a stranger rode into the clearing. He dismounted slowly, hands visible, eyes sharp. A town deputy by the look of him. "I'm looking for a woman," the man said. "Name's Mara Elson." Mara stepped forward before Frank could speak. "I'm here." The deputy's gaze flicked between them. "There's talk you were sold under false pretenses." Frank's jaw tightened. She wasn't sold. She was freed. The deputy studied Mara. "You here by choice?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Yes." Silence stretched. Finally, the deputy nodded. "That's all I needed to hear." When he left, the quiet felt heavier than before. Mara turned to Frank. "It won't end there." "No," he agreed. "But neither will this." That evening, as the sun dipped low, Mara stood on the porch and realized something with startling clarity. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was building. And for the first time she wondered not just whether she could stay, but whether she wanted a future that included the man who had never claimed her, yet stood between her and every storm. The deputy's visit changed the shape of the days that followed. Nothing visible shifted on the ranch, but the quiet carried weight now, like the land itself was holding its breath. Mara felt it when she stepped outside at dawn. when the wind moved through the grass with more purpose, when Frank scanned the horizon longer than usual before starting work. They didn't speak about it at first. Frank focused on reinforcing what already existed. He checked fence posts twice. He moved supplies closer to the cabin. He kept the rifle clean and accessible, but never displayed it. His calm didn't crack, but it sharpened. Mara noticed everything. She noticed how he positioned himself when strangers might approach, always between her and open land. She noticed how he never told her to stay inside, never tried to hide her away. Instead, he made sure she knew where to go if trouble came, how to move through the property without being seen if she needed to. "Not because I expect you to run," he told her one morning, handing her a map he'd drawn by hand. "Because knowing your options means you choose, not react." That night, Mara dreamed of Lone Mesa, of dust and ropes and men who wouldn't meet her eyes. She woke with a sharp inhale, heart racing. Frank was awake instantly. "Dream," she whispered, embarrassed. He sat up, keeping his distance. "You want the fire higher?" She nodded. As the flames grew, she spoke without looking at him. "If they force me back, I won't survive it." "They won't," he said, voice steady. "You can't promise that." "I'm not," he replied. "I'm telling you what I'll do." The certainty in his tone settled her more than comfort ever could. 2 days later, trouble came with boots and bravado. Owen returned with 2 men this time. They rode straight in, no hesitation, no pretense. Mara saw them from the porch and felt fear surge, hot and immediate. Frank stepped forward before she could move. "You were told to leave," he said evenly. Owen sneered.
"She belongs with me."
Lost starting to take interest. Mara's hands clenched. "I don't belong to you." One of the men laughed. "She doesn't get to decide." Frank shifted his weight. The air changed. "She does," he said. "And so do you. Right now." Owen reached for his belt. Frank didn't draw first. He spoke instead. "You step closer and this ends bad for you." There was no threat in his voice, just fact. The men hesitated. Owen didn't. What followed was fast, controlled and final. Frank moved with precision, disarming Owen before he could clear leather, twisting his arm just enough to force him to his knees. The other men froze, startled by how quickly it happened. Frank leaned close to Owen. "You come back again, and I won't stop at warning." He released him and stepped back. Owen scrambled up, humiliated, rage flickering behind his eyes. But fear won. He mounted and rode hard, his companions following. Silence crashed down afterward. Mara's knees shook. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding herself until the threat was gone. Frank turned to her, concern clear but restrained. "You hurt?" She shook her head. Then unexpectedly she laughed, breathless and disbelieving. "You didn't even raise your voice." Didn't need to. That night, the distance between them changed. They sat closer to the fire, not touching, but no longer carefully apart. The tension wasn't fear now. It was awareness. "I was ready to fight him myself," Mara admitted. Frank studied her. "I know. You didn't stop me." "I trusted you to choose," he said, "and I was ready if you did." The words settled deep. Later, as the fire burned low, Mara asked the question that had been forming for weeks. "What happens when they stop coming?" Frank considered. "Then we stop living like we're waiting." She met his gaze. "And what does that look like?" A long pause. "Looks like planting more than we need," he said quietly. "Fixing things that aren't broken yet. Making room." Her chest tightened. "For what?" "For someone who stays." Silence stretched, fragile and honest. Mara reached out first, resting her hand on the table between them. Not a plea, an offering. Frank didn't rush. After a moment he placed his hand over hers, warm and steady. No promises spoken. But something unspoken settled into place. Outside, the land lay quiet and wide. No longer just a refuge, but a future taking shape, one choice at a time.